So, Joe, Songs My Brothers Taught Me, what did you think?
I really enjoyed it. Really impressive film. It reminded me of lots of stuff from that opening shot with the boy on horseback and the beautiful sky behind him. I thought it was. It reminded me quite strongly of Carlos Regadas, particularly that Silent Light, which is a filmmaker we spoke about in relation to Stop the Pounding Heart, the Roberto Minervini film. Because Carlos Regadas, I don't know if he was an advisor or he was just thanked in the credits for that, but he was involved with that project in some way or another as well. And I think those two are an interesting comparison as well. This film with Stop the Pounding Heart, both of course use non-professional actors and are very really ensconced in a very naturalistic portrayal of a particular type of culture that's not generally in the mainstream. Um, so I'll probably come back to that in a second. But it also reminded me of that documentary a couple of years ago, How County This Morning, This Evening. Did you see that one?
Oh,
Really strange, poetic, associative kind of documentary. It was really, really impressive. Um, However, there were a few moments in this film where I felt these naturalistic, non-professional performances and the quietude of it, the unspectacular nature of it, was sort of at odds with occasionally slightly kind of mawkish, sentimental touches. There was a moment where the young girl is pawing through her dead father's ashes and crying, and that just seemed a bit too much. It didn't really fit with the style and tone of the film. And I was a bit nervous that was going to be the case more often when one of the first pieces of dialogue we hear is in voiceover. And it's the boy says something like, he's talking about wild horses. And he says, they have a bit of bad in them and you've got to leave a bit of the bad in them so that they can survive in this world. And it was a bit kind of on the nose, that dialogue. And there were also shades of Terrence Malick, definitely, where they're kind of walking through the fields and this swooning camera work and the beautiful light. And it was kind of in danger of imitating that a bit too strongly, particularly with that voiceover. But on the whole, I think it shone through with its own particular style. And I found it really engaging, really interesting. Performances were spectacular, particularly Jay Sean, the young girl. Um, I think it's a great example of what we were talking about last week about politics and poetry, because this film has a very clear and potent political message about Native American communities on reservations, but it is suffused with a real tender beauty and poetry that really carries the film. And on the political point, there were a few moments in the film where I was pausing it to make notes, and I was kind of overwhelmed really by the film because the film doesn't push this in your face at all. But I guess because I'm not used to seeing Native Americans in the cinema, and I'm not used to seeing this whole issue of reservations, I'm not used to being confronted by it. And so even though the film isn't really explicitly about that, I was just confronted over again with the sort of brute fact of the history of the United States is the history of the eradication and marginalization of a people. And of course, we all know that's what conquering nations do. And, that's what so-called civilization is based on. But it just seemed so kind of overwhelmingly heartbreaking occasionally, particularly in relation to that guy who's the artist, the guy who's covered head to foot in tattoos, and his house is just covered in, the walls are covered in murals, and he paints everything, and he makes his own clothes. And you think in different circumstances, this guy would have gone to art school and been recognized as he's just got creativity pouring out of him. And yet this guy, like everyone else in the film, his prospects are nil. They've got no money, no real aspirations. And it reminded me, there's a moment in Andrea Arnold's American Honey, where one of the girls is talking about her dreams. And she says, one day I'll have my own trailer. And it's like the best she can think of is to imagine that one day she'll have her own trailer in a trailer park. And these kids are kind of the same. Their teacher is asking them at one point, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they're like, well, I want to be a rodeo rider and I want to ride bulls. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's like these kids can't conceptualize even a future or a life beyond the confines of this really seriously deprived reservation. And I think it's a great example of how you do politics in cinema in a way that is profoundly affecting, without ever once having a character stand up and say, you know, we are marginalized and persecuted and I'm not going to stand for it. You know, there's no real, there's no confrontation. It's not confrontational, these politics, but it is nonetheless always present and very, very powerful, I thought. So that was what affected me most. And it was the stuff that's not said, you know, it's this, particularly the story of that guy with the tattoos and stuff. And you just think, and even at the end when, okay, he doesn't go to LA because they burn his truck, and he comes home and he's reunited with his sister and they go back into that house, and you think, yeah, maybe they'll be all right, whatever that means. You know, what does being all right mean in this community? Not much, in terms of like life chances and experiences and broadening your horizon. You know, it doesn't mean much at all. I thought it was a really potent, powerful film. As I said, occasionally there were kind of sentimental, mawkish touches, which it seemed like there was almost a conflict within the filmmaker between just letting the film be and kind of injecting it with a more almost Hollywoody sort of structure and tone. I was pleased to see that the more naturalistic style won out, and that's what characterizes the film most frequently. And I'm really looking forward to Nomadland.
Yeah, I too really enjoyed it. I wasn't really in the mood to watch a film last night, and so I was a little bit uncertain when I pressed play, but you know, within minutes it had completely seduced me, and I thoroughly enjoyed 90 minutes, isn't it? I thoroughly enjoyed the full 90 minutes. I if I start with the criticism first, then it's a tiny criticism. I don't think I'd go quite as far as you. I didn't feel any problem with the scene where she's poring over the burnt remains of her father's house, because as with everything in the film, it was naturally done. I guess it was done in a way that, I mean, it could have been done in a more subtle way, I guess, but that didn't stand out for me at all. What did stand out was the closing words. You know, the film is bookended by by him speaking about the wild horses at the beginning, which I think works quite well. You know, and leave a bit of wildness inside them to, you know, in order that they can survive. It's kind of obvious, but I think it fits well with the poetry of the film. But then to kind of clip something onto the end, to make that a bookend, you know, and he says, when the wind's too strong, we all know to lean into it so that we don't get blown away. We didn't need that to be said. You know, that was already obvious in the film, and in some ways it did make me think, oh, maybe the opening narration, the opening words were unnecessary as well. So it kind of devalued. I was happy with the opening words, but so, you know, it feels like nitpicking because I love this film, but it just, those closing words, it didn't need those closing words. I felt it did feel that was making it slightly yeah, over explaining really, which just wasn't necessary. I guess that, you know, when you see where Nomadland is going in terms of, you know, acceptability in Hollywood, maybe she does as a filmmaker. I mean, I didn't know anything about her work. I've seen the trailer for Nomadland, and I've obviously seen this. Maybe she is heading for a more kind of, or making an art house movie that has a commercial twist to it, and maybe that obviousness at the end is necessary for a commercial audience. Maybe that is where she's heading in her filmmaking, and you know, there's nothing wrong with that. I guess you don't have to make pure art house movies. that's the only negative thing I've got to say about it. I loved it apart from that. Of course, I haven't seen the other film you mentioned, but obviously Stop the Pounding Heart. There were so many similarities with it, but it didn't feel like, I mean, I haven't checked which one came first, but it didn't feel like one was a copy of the other. It felt like they both legitimately sit there, you know, alongside each other. I don't think if you watch one, you'd then find the other one boring because it's doing a similar thing, but there were so many similarities. And one thing that really fascinated me about it was I love this kind of uncertainty about what's documentary and what's fiction, because, you know, I think both these films, using non-professional actors and kind of having lots of elements of authentic reality in the film, alongside, you know, a screenplay and people acting. I really like this idea as documentary. You know, as you know, I've been looking closely at documentary for the last few years and trying to make a documentary. And I really, you know, the idea of the documentary maker being, you know, an impartial observer, fly on the wall, you know, not interfering, you know, just observing, is really uninteresting compared to this. Because I think when you look at Stop the Pounding Heart and this film, I think they both have a documentary element. I mean, I think you could call them documentaries because they both are so authentic. You know, they're shot in real communities with real people, and I'm certain that, you know, many of the things in this film, you know, weren't planned. You know, if it's, you can imagine that I mean, there was a screenplay, and, you know, you can imagine that certain things were mapped out, but, you know, if you just happen to film something, an animal or something happening, you know, I really like that. And, you know, maybe it's not clear what was created and what was natural. And I think that actually in both films, it required the filmmaker to be really trusted by the community that it's in. It required the filmmaker to be known, not just there as a kind of, don't mind me, you know, I'm just holding the camera. I think that to get the level of authenticity this film has, the filmmaker has to have a relationship with the people that she's working with. And I just think that's really impressive. And I think, you know, that's why I found both films so similar, in that they'd obviously spent a lot of time getting to know the people that they were working with and the communities, and they were well trusted by the communities. And in both cases, it's not like they glossed over the problems of the communities. You know, the brutality of this life, the difficulty of the life, the problems, the alcoholism, the, you know, the broken families, you know, the 25 children all dotted all over the place. It doesn't shy away, as you say. It's a highly political film, but I so agree with you in terms of the balance between the poetry. It's so poetic, it's so beautiful, it's so gentle, you know, but it's a straight, I think it really achieves something very special, because it's harsh, but it's beautiful as well. And, you know, there's something I kept feeling that it's really sad. You know, this is a society where, crazy society where children, you know, have to parent themselves. The adults are just, you know, either non-existent or just incapacitated. And, you know, so the children are so disadvantaged. But at the same time, they're wandering around these stunning locations. They live in just such an amazing place with the plains and the Badlands. And, you know, it's that in another way, I thought how privileged they are. You know, these they're not living in an inner city with kind of grime and dirt and crime all around them. You know, they live in a beautiful place. And I think, you know, that was reflected in throughout the whole film, the kind of harshness and the beauty sitting alongside each other in a really poetic way. And so I just thought that was so successful. I never found the film sentimental. I mean, even this statement at the end, I don't think it was over sentimental. I think it was just unnecessary. It was over explaining. And I didn't find it intrusive either, even though it clearly was highlighting some, you know, pretty major problems within that community. It's interesting what you say about the politics, because and you know, that this is a side of America that, you know, is kind of so much in the background. There were several shots where it really looked, I thought the, you know, the street where they were selling the clothes looked like a South African township. It didn't look like America, you know, it looked, so it's a kind of unique type of ghetto, really, I guess, that you know, just isn't in the traditional view of the United States. And so, yeah, just so successful. I loved it. I just thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I think this one's, I think, far more deliberately structured than Stop the Pounding Heart. You know, it's got a very clearly scripted narrative, and there are sequences that are clearly, you know, performances. But I understand parallels, and I saw them too. You know, I think both films have an admirable authenticity, and as you say, the relationship, the obvious relationship between the filmmaker and the community they're working in both cases is what makes the film makes the film as potent as they are, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think Minervini in Stop the Pounding Heart intervened less than Chloe does here, because she does go further in kind of creating more fiction and creating more, you know, more of a story. You do feel that in the case of Stop the Pounding Heart, it was closer to a documentary than to fiction. I think that all of the characters in Stop the Pounding Heart had their real names. I don't think there were any fictional names. So I think all of the actors played themselves. Whereas in this film, some of the characters had their own Christian name, but, you know, different surnames. And so I agree that there was more structured. There was a story through this that wasn't present in Stop the Pounding Heart. But, you know, so I think in some ways, I mean, I'm a big believer in artwork, in the minimal intervention of the artist. You know, that's the trick. That, you know, that's the way I like to make art, that actually the intervention of the artist should be minimal. And both of them have gone into these communities and found poetry and beauty without, you know, without doing too much. But she successfully went further, and I think, you know, it's harder to go further and make it structured and still have that authenticity. So really impressed.
Yeah.
Looking forward to Nomadland, although I just, from seeing the trailer, Nomadland did seem to have a similar type of feel to it. So I don't know whether all her films, I mean, is she Chinese?
Chinese American, I think. Yeah,
Chinese American.
She did. There's one called The Rider as well, which I didn't see. I think that's sort of sandwiched between the two. But I think that might be on Mubi as well. But the other thing that it reminded me of that I forgot to mention was there was a documentary. When was it? It was about 5-6 years ago, called The Seventh Fire, which was about alcoholism and gangs in a reservation in Minnesota, which is worth looking at as well.
Right, excellent. So highly recommended.
For sure, yeah, really impressive movie.
Yeah, great. What are we watching next?
Next up is Those That at a Distance Resemble Another by Jessica Sarah Rinland.
Sounds interesting. Looking forward to it.